On November 4th, 1914, as the world plunged into the chaos of the First World War, a different kind of journey began, one not of conflict but of courage, ambition, and human endurance. Sir Ernest Shackleton, a seasoned polar explorer with a reputation for leadership and resilience, stood aboard the Endurance, a sturdy wooden ship built for ice navigation as it departed from Plymouth, England. With him were 27 crew members, all volunteers drawn by adventure, scientific curiosity, and the allure of the unknown. Their mission was audacious to become the first humans to cross the Atlantic continent on foot, stretching nearly 2,900 kilometers, 1,800 miles from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea via the South Pole. This transcontinental trek would take about 120 days under ideal conditions, a monumental challenge in an era before GPS, satellite communication, or even reliable weather forecasting. There were no rescue helicopters, no instant contact with the outside world. They were venturing into one of the most remote and hostile environments on Earth, relying solely on physical strength, ingenuity, and sheer willpower. Shackleton's plan was meticulously crafted. The Endurance would sail to the Weddell Sea coast of Antarctica and land a team near Vassal Bay. From there, six men, including Shackleton, would begin the overland journey toward the South Pole using dog sleds and man-hauled sledges. Meanwhile, another ship, the Aurora, would deliver a support team to the Ross seaside, laying supply depots to assist the final leg of the crossing. It was a coordinated effort spanning two coasts and thousands of miles of frozen wilderness. But Antarctica, as Shackleton will well know, was not a land that could be tamed by plants alone. Trapped in ice and the slow death of the Endurance. After a brief stop at South Georgia Island on November 5th, 1914, a lush green outpost teeming with wildlife, the last test of warmth and life before deep south, the Endurance pushed further into the Weddell Sea. By January 18, 1915, the ship found itself surrounded by thick, unyielding pack ice. Despite the crew's efforts to navigate through narrow channels and the engine's persistent churning, the ice closed in like a vice. By the end of journey, the Endurance was completely immobilized. The crew had become prisoners of the drifting ice floe, a vast, slow-moving island of frozen sweetwater that carried them helplessly northward, away from their intended landing site and deeper into uncertainty. For months, the men lived in suspended animation. They maintained routines, scientific observations, repairs, hunting seals for fresh meat, and even organizing theatrical performances and sports competitions to preserve morale. But beneath the surface, tension grew. The pressure of ice groaned against the hull like a living beast. Cracks began to appear in the ship's wooden frame. On October 24th, 1915, the ice delivered a fatal blow. The stern post shattered, flooding the aft compartments with freezing water. For 3 days, the crew worked tirelessly, pumping water and trying to shore up the damage, but it was hopeless. On October 27, 1915, Shackleton gave the order, abandon ship. The Endurance, their home, their lifeline, their symbol of hope, was left behind, slowly being crushed by the relentless ice. It finally sank beneath the waves on November 21st, 1915, disappearing into the dark waters of the Weddell Sea. As the last mast dipped below the surface, the crew stood in silence. They were now truly alone, stranded on a drifting ice floe, with only three lifeboats, limited supplies, and no means of calling for help. Survival on the ice, the long drift. With the ship gone, the crew established ocean camps on the largest nearby ice floe, a temporary refuge on a platform of ice that was itself subject to the whims of wind and current. Their supplies were meager, about 1 month's worth of preserved food, some medical supplies, clothing, tools, and personally belongings salvaged before the sinking. They had three lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, each just over 6 meters long, designed for emergencies, not long voyages. Temperatures plunged to minus 50 degrees centigrade during the Antarctic winter, and the sun disappeared for 6 months, leaving them in perpetual darkness. Frostbite, hypothermia, and psychological strain became constant threats. To survive, they relied on hunting seals and penguins, provided vital protein and fat. Eventually, as food grew scarcer, their sled dogs, once companions and workers, were sacrificed for sustenance, a painful but necessary decision. Shackleton, ever the leader, maintained strict discipline and routine. He enforced equal rations, rotated duties, and ensured every man had a role, whether it was cooking, ice monitoring, or morale boosting storytelling. He walked among them daily, checking on their health, listening to their concerns, sharing jokes, and projecting unwavering confidence. His presence was a psychological anchor in a world of chaos. By April 1916, the ice floe had drifted northward, carried by ocean currents, but it was also breaking apart. Cracks widened, the platform shrank from kilometers across to just 50 meters wide, too small and unstable to remain safe. The time had come to launch the boats. The boat journey to Elephant Island, a voyager through hell. On April 9th, 1916, the crew packed their remaining supplies and prepared for what would become one of the most harrowing small boat journeys in maritime history. Over the next week, they navigated through a labyrinth of ice floes, towering sea icebergs, and violent seas. The boats were constantly at risk of capsizing or being crushed by shifting ice. One of the most dramatic moments came on April 15th when fireman Annie Holness fell into the freezing waters, a death sentence. In such conditions, rescued quickly, he was stripped and wrapped in every available dry garment. For hours, the crew walked him back and forth across the ice floe to generate body heat. Miraculously, he survived. After 7 days of relentless struggle, the men reached Elephant Island on 15th, 1916. 497 days after leaving England, it was a barren, rocky outcrop devoid of human life, shelter, or resources, but it was solid ground. For the first time in over a year, they stood on land not made of ice. Yet, Elephant Island offered no real hope of rescue. It was far from shipping lanes, with no radio, no inhabitants, and no way to signal for help. If they waited, they would likely perish. Shackleton knew he had to act. Shackleton's quest for rescue, the most dangerous sea crossing. He faced a grim choice. To the west lay Cape Horn, 800 kilometers to the west southeast. The Falkland Islands, 880 kilometers, and to the northeast. South Georgia Island, 1300 kilometers across the treacherous Drake Passage, the most violent stretch of ocean on earth. Shackleton chose South Georgia, though the farthest it had a whaling station, a chance of help. The others were either too remote or politically unstable due to the ongoing war. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton and five crewmen, Frank Worsley, navigator, Tom Crean, veteran explorer, Harry McNish, carpenter, John Vincent, and Timothy McCarthy, set out in the jam-scared, the strongest of the three lifeboats, which McNish had reinforced with materials salvaged from the Endurance. For 16 days, they battled hurricane force winds, waves as high as 12 meters, and temperatures so cold the ice coated the boat, threatening to capsize it. They bailed water constantly, slept in soaked clothes, and navigated by dead reckoning. Worsley's extraordinary skill with the sextant used in brief moments between storm kept them on course. On May 10, 1916, they sighted land, South Georgia Island, but the storm drove them to the uninhabited southern coast, far from the whaling station at Stormness on the northern side. They had landed in one of the most rugged, glaciated terrains on the planet, and they had to cross it. Crossing South Georgia, the impossible task. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean decided to make the cross on foot. The other three men, weakened by scurvy and exhaustion, would remain behind with the boat. With no maps, no tents, no sleeping bags, and only a rope and ice axe and minimal rations, the trio began a 36 hours non-stop march across glaciers, crevasses, and sheer rock faces. They cut steps into ice cliffs, crossed unstable snow bridges, and navigated by compass and instinct. At one point, they slid down a steep snow slope at terrifying speed, stopping only at the edge of a cliff. Shackleton later described it as a miracle they survived. On May 20th, 1916, they stumbled into Stormness whaling station, bearded, filthy, and barely recognizable. The station manager, Carl Anton Larson, reportedly asked, "Who the bloody hell are you?" When told it was Shackleton, he collapsed in shock. The world had presumed them dead for over a year. Worsley and Crean were rescued by boat shortly after, but Shackleton's mission was far from over. Rescue and final salvation mere leaving men behind. Shackleton's first words upon reaching safety were not of triumph but of urgency. "Tell me, when do we sail back to get the others?" Multiple rescue attempts followed. The first three were thwarted by impenetrable ice around Elephant Island, but on August 30th, 1916, after 4 months of waiting, the Chilean naval tug Yalcho, captained by Luis Pardo, finally broke through. When the ship arrived, the 22 men on Elephant Island, cold, thin, but alive, were overjoyed, and all 28 members of the Endurance expedition had survived. It was nothing short of miraculous enduring lessons. The Endurance expedition failed in its original goal. No one crossed Antarctica, but it succeeded in something far greater: the preservation of every human life in the face of overwhelming odds. It stands as one of the greatest survival stories in history, not for its conquest of nature, but for its triumph of human spirit. Leadership under pressure. Shackleton's leadership was not defined by authority but by empathy, presence, and decisiveness. He led from the front, shared hardships equally, and never let morale falter. He once said, difficulties are just things to overcome. After all, his ability to inspire hope even when all seemed lost was his greatest strength. Mental resilience and hope. In extreme environment, the mind often breaks before the body. Shackleton understood this. He maintained routines, celebrated small victories, and gave every man a sense of purpose. Hope was not passive, it was actively cultivated. Adaptability and strategic thinking. When the ship was lost, Shackleton instantly shifted from explorer to rescuer. He abandoned the original mission without hesitation and focused solely on survival. His decision to sail to South Georgia, though risky, was based on careful risk assessment and trust in his team's skills, teamwork, and unity. Despite diverse backgrounds, sailors, scientists, carpenters, stowaways, the crew functioned as a single unit. Conflicts were managed, roles respected, and solidarity maintained. Shackleton ensured no man felt forgotten. The power of purpose. Even in darkness, the crew held onto a shared purpose to survive, to return home, to not let each other down. That collective will become their resilience. Legacy of endurance. The story of the endurance has inspired generations of explorers, leaders, and ordinary people facing adversity. In 2022, the wreck of Endurance was discovered 30,000 meters below the Weddell Sea, remarkably preserved, upright on the seafloor, a silent monument to human courage. Shackleton never returned to Antarctica. He died in 1932 during another expedition buried on South Georgia Island, the very land that once saved his life. But his legacy endures. The Endurance expedition is no longer remembered for its failure to cross a continent, but for its success in proving that even in the darkest cold, the human spirit can shine. As polar historian Roland Huntford once wrote, Shackleton was not a great man, he was a great leader. And in the frozen silence of Antarctic, where the ice still drifts and the wind howls across endless white, story of 28 men who refused to give up continues to echo. A timeless treatment to endurance, leadership, and the unbreakable will to survive.